Welcome everyone to season 3 of National Park Service Presents. This is an online series that runs every other Wednesday. We start in mid-January and it goes into the end of April. This year it ends April 26th. It covers a whole multitude of topics, but tonight is focusing on environmental justice. I'm really excited. But before we begin, I have to go over some of the boring Zoom features. I know, like I said, we've been doing this for years, but there's always a newbie every now and then. So let's get started on those. If you're like, hey, Karen, I loved this, but my friend would have loved it too. How can I see it again? Are you recording? Yes, we are. We are recording, and you can catch up on this series and even past seasons on the Boston Public Library YouTube page. The best way to find it, honestly, is to Google Boston Public Library YouTube page, and you'll see our entire playlist of these presentations. This will probably come up in the next, I don't know, within a week or so. It doesn't come up automatically, so give us a moment, but it will be there. And you can also look at our genealogy ones up there too. Those are really fun. If you are not enjoying the captions that are appearing on your screen, you can turn them off. In the navigation bar below, there's the CC button. You can click on them, turn them off. And in the navigation button, you will see that something is open that is usually not open during a presentation of this size, is the chat button. You are welcome to ask any and all of your questions in there. All right, Ranger Sean is going through all the questions and collecting them. And at the end of Ranger Will's presentation, he will pop on the screen and ask your wonderful questions to further our knowledge. The one thing about the chat, though, is that we don't need to be shy. We love when you guys are typing in it. We just ask everyone to be respectful. And also notice the to form. All right. If you're typing in your question, do you want to send it to just hosts and panelists, meaning everyone you see on the screen? Or do you want to send it to everyone, meaning the people you see on the screen and everyone else watching back home? It doesn't matter which one you choose. It's whatever your comfort level is. All right. Now, at the very end, when I come back on and say, good night and have a wonderful evening, a survey will come on the screen and I ask you, and I kind of slightly, wonderfully, beautifully beg you to fill it in because that is how I make this better for you guys. So without further more babbling from me, I'm going to welcome Ranger Will as he presents Face to Face with Nature Itself, Forest Festivals in the 19th Century Fight for Climate Justice.
Hi, Karen. Thank you. I'd like to thank you all for coming. Welcome to my presentation on behalf of Boston African American National Historic Park and the National Parks of Boston. I'm really excited to present this information because it's a really exciting intersection of history, social justice, and ecology, and topics we talk about. Thank you all for coming. This first slide I have is a depiction of the area we'll talk about this evening, the Middlesex Fells Reservation, which sits north of Boston and consists of over 2,500 forest acres bordering the town of Melrose, Malden, Stoneham, and Winchester. And this is a story about the land, and it's also about the men and women who recognize the value of natural space around Boston and advocated for its preservation. And this bird's eye view of the Middlesex Fells, again, is looking south toward looking north towards the city of Boston. Some of the spaces we'll talk about today are highlighted here, including Spot Pond, the north and south reservoirs, and the Middlesex Reservoir. Slide 3, or this slide we have, is depicting a modern view of the Middlesex Fells, which you can see the intersecting cities, including the cities of Winchester, Melrose, Stoneham, and Medford, Massachusetts, with the modern view with Interstate 93 passing through this area. And I have displayed here several topographical maps that provide, or maps just in case to let you know, provide geographic and elevation relief details. And this one depicts the Middlesex Fells map, and you can see some of the highlights of this area that we're going to discuss this evening. And also the Blue Hills, which is also part of this preservation effort that we'll discuss here. And we can see some of the topographical areas in this area that would be preserved through these preservation efforts and the forest festivals that we'll discuss here. And I don't think you can really discuss this area in fairly without discussing mention, of course, the native peoples who lived here pre-colonization, primarily the Massachusetts tribe, who were here before 1630 and 1620, who hunted and colonized this area, who hunted and farmed this area thousands of years before Europeans lived here on the North Shore of Massachusetts, or the North Shore of Boston. Some of the people we'll talk about today, including are depicted here. Some of these folks who, men and women who helped to put their names on the Middlesex Fells and helped to preserve this area, including faces that we'll discuss in further detail, including Eliza Wright, Wilson Flagg, Charles Eliot, Sylvester Baxter, and Virginia Tudor. Folks whose names, again, exist on the Middlesex Fells today and whose work came together to help preserve this area. And this is a story, again, about folks who coming together and donating their time to help preserve this area and to make sure that it still exists today here in the 21st century. And this campaign to save the fells consisted of many different areas, several different areas. It consisted of newspaper articles, essays, donation of land and money, and above all, donations of, or above all, a factor of immersion in nature. So bringing folks together to participate in this natural area in a time when that was becoming much rare for a lot of people. So you may ask yourself, maybe asking yourself, first of all, what is a fell? That's a word we don't hear necessarily all the time today. Well, the fell is an Old English or Saxon word for barren rocks that filter down into valleys and streams to sustain natural life. The North Shore of Boston has a lot of these barren rocks, and these rocks help to filter water down into valleys to help to sustain plant life. So that Old English or Saxon word that gives it the name fells, as we can kind of see here in this image of some of the rocky area along the Middlesex Fells. So why forest festivals? Why do we have these groups of people coming together to preserve this land? What's the need for that? Well, there were several things going on in 19th century America that would make this necessary. One is rapid industrialization. So lots of factories being built, folks building factories, cutting down a lot of the natural areas around the city of Boston and throughout New England and the United States. Another need would be, or another cause of this, or why we need forest festivals, the increasing urban population. So folks are no longer as connected to the natural land with industrialization, living much of their lives in cities, and an increasing need for people to participate in the natural world, which they no longer have as much access to. And a third is a dawning understanding of the effects of pollution on the natural world. So all these coming together to make this necessary, or make this an important factor in creating these festivals. So we can see on this map here, sort of depiction of what North America and what the eastern half of North America looked like pre-colonization. So in 1620, each dot representing approximately 25,000 acres of virgin forest. So we can see in 1620 that much of this area, The eastern half of North America is covered by forest. By 1850, again, each dot representing approximately 25,000 acres of forest. It's very much reduced. And by 1926, most of that virgin forest in North America has been removed. So what's the cause of this? Why? What's the main industry? Well, in New England, a lot of this is driven by logging. Logging had been an important industry going back to colonial days. Much of the forest had been cut down, provide the way for to build ships in colonial times, and later in the industrial era to provide mills for factories and for paper mills. So this is going on throughout Massachusetts and throughout New England. And because of that, much of the by the middle of the 19th century, especially the later 19th century, most of these forest hills are gone. Forests are gone, as we can see in this depiction of forest clearing in Vermont. So this is an ongoing concern with many people interested in growing interest in ecology and preserving the forests that are left. And one of the most important individuals in the story is this man, Eliza Wright. Eliza Wright said in one of these first forest festivals in October of 1880, he's quoted as saying, "We want a plan to bring everyone face to face with nature itself." Eliza Wright lived between 1884 and 1885. And he has an important connection to the, well, just a little bit about his background. He was born in Connecticut in 1804. His family moved to Ohio's Western Reserve. Wright followed the lead of many elites in his generation. He went east and attended Yale University. He worked as a professor at Yale, but he quickly became interested in involved in the abolitionist movement. He resigned his work as a professor and would dedicate his life, the rest of his, or the part of his career moving forward, to becoming a dedicated abolitionist. He would move to the Middlesex Fells area and to the North Shore of Massachusetts in 1864, and would quickly fall in love with the Middlesex Fells area. But Wright had been a lifelong abolitionist. He is known today also as the father of insurance for his work in insurance reform. He was a mathematician and a conservationist. Wright had invented a system of calculation to calculate the value of insurance and eligibility for insurance. He was the inventor of the Wright arithmeter, used to calculate a series of high number calculations for insurance. And of course, he was also involved very heavily in conservation. As an abolitionist, he was directly involved in some of the most important cases of abolition cases and for protecting enslaved people in regards to the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850. He was a member of Boston's Vigilance Committee, which worked to protect formerly enslaved people who made their way to the North Shore of or Boston area in Massachusetts. And he would find himself at a very important movement, or very important moment, when he was explicitly or directly involved in rescuing a man named Shadrach Minkins to escape to Canada. Picture here is the image related to Shadrach Minkins and his attempt to be re-enslaved. And on the right is Senator Daniel Webster. Daniel Webster specifically mentioned in a letter to the President of the United States, then Millard Fillmore, that this man, Eliza Wright, should be arrested specifically for his role in the escape of Shadrach Minkins. So Eliza Wright making good trouble for himself there in the 1850s. Wright would also find himself as a important advocate for the poor and for alleviating poverty of citizens in industrial in the industrial United States and Europe. He traveled to London and was heavily influenced by the poverty and environmental pollution that he saw there in the 1850s. There's an image of some of the poor in London as that city rapidly industrialized in the middle of the middle of the 19th century. He became increasingly concerned by the pollution that he saw in London, and he was heavily involved in and concerned about the effects that the burning of coal would have on individuals living in a city like London at that time. He was also heavily influenced while he visited London in preservation, and we believe this is where he first became interested in preserving, in the potential of preserving these forests. When he witnessed or was involved in the effort to preserve an area known as the Epping Forest, just north of London. He said later that my attention was attracted by the stupendous effort made in England to preserve the Epping Forest as a grand recreation place for England. And clearly that would play an important role in his later decision to help preserve the Middlesex Fells. He was also influenced by the work of a man named George Beryl Emerson, who was a scientist and mathematician who in the 1840s was discovering the effects of carbon and burning of coal on the atmosphere and the heating of the atmosphere. And his concern over the use of fossil fuels and their effects on human health. Emerson had determined that continued burning of fossil fuels would heat the atmosphere and create an environment more fit for dinosaurs than humans, as he put it. So Eliza Wright and many of these folks who helped preserve the fells will be building on a legacy of preservation, which was something that was beginning to emerge in cities such as Boston in the 1840s and in other cities such as New York throughout the United States. This image is of the dedication of the public garden in the 1840s. Of course, Boston had small green spaces, but Wright's vision would quickly turn to something larger. But these conservation efforts in areas such as the public garden and Central Park in New York City, which had formerly been a location where African Americans lived in New York, and was also the garbage dump for the city, would serve as an inspiration for expanding these areas of preservation, not just within but without cities as well. Another important figure in this effort to preserve the fells was this man was important. This man was important. His name was Wilson Flagg. Wilson Flagg was a noted naturalist of the time, a contemporary of folks such as Henry David Thoreau and others. He would call for the first attempt at preserving the Middlesex Fells as far back as 1852. He wrote he invited folks to come to a meeting in Danvers, Massachusetts, in Salem or near Salem, and this group would come together and would try to decide for ways to preserve the fells and to make sure they survived and weren't destroyed. Unfortunately, at this point, that Wilson Flagg would call this meeting, but he couldn't attract enough attention to bring people together to preserve it. So this first attempt preserving the fells in 1852 would not be successful. But Wilson Flagg would continue to advocate. One of his most famous works of the time was a well-known work known as Woods and Byways of New England. And he was very, very adept at creating images, drawing sketches that he would put in these books and in Woods and Byways of the animal life, birds, and the trees around the Middlesex Fells area, as it would come to be called. And he would also, in this book, write an essay, and one of the first essays, arguing for preservation of the Middlesex Fells. Another important figure in this movement was a man named Sylvester Baxter. Sylvester Baxter wrote a article in the Boston Herald in 1879, which for the first time officially named this area the Middlesex Fells. This article was very important because it drew people for the first time. It sort of caught on among a larger population, with folks reading about this area and deciding or becoming increasingly interested in preserving the Middlesex Fells area. And again, Sylvester Baxter is credited for the first time in 1879 with naming this area the Middlesex Fells, which we know it today. He would later go on to become one of the first heads of the organization, which would eventually work to or be charged with preserving this area, known as the Fells. So when we talk about forest festivals, what did a forest festival look like? And this image is of the forest today in winter in the Middlesex Fells. Well, a forest festival, among other things, the most important element was about communion with nature. But in these forest festivals, which began in 1870s, early 1870s, and continued through the mid 1880s, you would have folks coming together to commune and participate in nature. But they would also consist of speeches, poems, nature classes, music, people singing, and above all, promoting an idea of community ownership of the natural lands around Boston. And this is an image of Spot Pond today in the Middlesex Fells. There's some of the images that brought together to show you what this area looks like today. The first call for a national or for a state park preserve the Fells was given by Eliza Wright at Mount Andrew Park in 1869. And in this meeting at Eliza Wright's home at Mount Andrew Park, he stated in 1867, what is wanted is not a local breathing hole like our common that would be crowded if more than our neighborhood should meet there. Of such we should have many more oases in the desert, in this desert of brick and mortar. So Eliza Wright in this speech is calling on not just individual parks within cities like the city of Boston, but into larger areas which people can go out of the city and preserve large areas of green space. In June of 1880, in the first of what would come to be known as the forest festivals, Eliza Wright put out a notice for a calling of a Sunday summer school. In this notice, he said the subscriber invites all persons, irrespective of age or sex, who are fond of studying life and natural scenery, to meet at his house in Pine Hill, Forest Street, and Medford any Sunday this summer at from 9 to 10 a.m. for mutual instruction and exploration of the wild region about Spot Pond, called by some the Middlesex Fells. So this is a very informal way of bringing folks out and encouraging them for the first time to come and participate in these in the Middlesex Fells. In describing the fells in this this call, Wright would say that it is a volcanic locality full of rocks, small trees, birds, and glacial scratches. Encouraging people to come out, he would say it is best to have on workday or your everyday clothes and something in your pocket to allay any casual gnawings of hunger. So in other words, bring some comfortable clothes, bring some food, something to eat, and come out and enjoy the natural area and the Middlesex Fells. This is an image of Beaver Dam Creek over the Middlesex Fells today. So the Middlesex Fells organization, or formal organization of the Fells, would take place in October 1880. And this important moment because this was the first time that Flagg and Wright would come together formally to adapt the Middlesex Fells. And this would take place on an area in the Middlesex Fells known as Cheese Rock. So you may ask yourself, why is this called Cheese Rock? Well, according to legend, the first governor of the colony of Massachusetts, John Winthrop, and some of his compatriots had gone out and explored the Middlesex, the area known today as the Middlesex Fells, and they sat down upon this rock and they had nothing to eat but some cheese. So this was the legend of Cheese Rock, but this would be the place where folks would come together to establish what would become the Middlesex Fells organization. This is a view from Cheese Rock or Bear Hill or Winthrop Hill, as this area is known today. And at this meeting, they would come together on October 15th, 1880, to establish their statement of principle. And this was consist of several purposes in this forest festival. The first and maybe the most important is community ownership. So community ownership, they would be established through a joint stock company or through individual purposes. So people could have or individuals and groups could have a direct stake in the land around the Middlesex Fells. They would agree to set aside a portion of the land for non-development, and also a portion for a living natural history museum. So even going back to this time, folks are starting to look in this particular group at ways of preserving natural land, and this is sort of a debate that still goes on today and is still involved for areas of preservation and ecology of the United States as to how areas should be preserved. And both are done today through land set aside for non-development and some land set aside for folks to use and enjoy. So this set up October 15th, 1880. And as I mentioned, this was continue. One of the most important elements was the newspaper campaign. So you would see articles about the Middlesex Fells showing up in local newspapers. This particular one in the Boston Evening Transcript, quoting or describing some of the events that took place at this meeting, including Eliza Wright saying sort of a idea of some of the reasons why we should preserve this area, specifically saying a thing of beauty is a joy forever, referring to the land. Wright would say the beauty which you see here is not the work of men or money. And he is quoted later in the Boston Herald on March 3rd, 1881, describing the park, that it will lead to one of the largest and most delightful parks in America. This park is not to be made. It already exists. It requires no art to beautify it. It only requires that science shall prevent art from spoiling it and give nature an opportunity to restore some of the grand features which have been marred by thoughtlessness. Here we see a article, June of 1883, highlighting the Forest Festival for Saturday, June 16th, 1883, saying the public are earnestly invited, men and women, children, to use as much of that day as possible in exploring the Middlesex Fells, to see whether it is best to make that track a public domain according to law. So the ultimate goal of this movement is to preserve these areas under protection of the law by encouraging people to come out and participate in become a part of the Middlesex Fells area. In 1883 would take place the largest of the forest festivals, and this would be a celebration of passing of what was known as the Metropolitan Park Act of 1882. And then the Metropolitan Park Act essentially for the first time gave the state of Massachusetts the opportunity to set aside this land if it chose to do so. And in this festival, in this image here, we have the area where the festival took place at the base of Bear Hill. And in the largest turnout to date, you had many public officials coming out to participate. You had citizens brought in from Boston. The governor of the state came out, as well as other representatives. Many people coming out to participate in nature walks. People were brought in by trolley, by carriage, all coming out to experience the Middlesex Fells and to take part in this in the natural beauty of this area. Monetary donations were very critical in preserving the Middlesex Fells. We can see here in this list of monetary donations that many people would contribute. Many of the well-known folks, including Eliza Wright at the top, contributed funds. Many folks from the cities around the Middlesex Fells, including Medford, Stoneham, and Boston, would raise funds to donate and to preserve the land. In this one instance depicted here, as many as $14,102 in the 1880s, just shows the interest being generated by these forest festivals. Speeches or essays were an important part of the preservation efforts. In this essay known as the Voice of a Tree, Eliza Wright would take the voice of the perspective of a tree in arguing in telling the story of the Middlesex Fells from the perspective of the largest plants, of course, the trees in the area. He would say in this, whoops, sorry. Taking the perspective of a tree, he would say, "I who address you now am a tree. I want your friendship for your sake as well as mine. I do not speak for myself only, but for all of your kind, including the members of the vegetable and animal world. Let us henceforth and be true friends," he said. "You all have the advantage of us trees in that you move about and have teeth, axes, and saws. Use them, but not to your own hurt." In conclusion, in the Voice of a Tree, Wright would say, "Let me just whisper in your ear, my kind friend, that what is our food is your poison," of course, referring to carbon. "Don't take that," or to carbon dioxide. "Don't take that on my authority. Go to your chemist, ask him what would be the effect of clapping a glass bell over Boston. He will probably tell you that trees on the common and public garden would do something toward keeping the human inhabitants from smothering in the poisonous gas of their own breath." And that is from Pinus strobus, one of the trees in the Middlesex Fells. So important connection, taking the perspective of the tree and the connection of all life together in the Middlesex Fells. Don't think it'd be proper to talk about this movement without talking about Eliza Wright's daughter, Ellen Wright. Unfortunately, I did not find an image of Ellen Wright, but she was very important in her father's work. Ellen Wright and her father both shared a love for the Middlesex Fells and experienced this area together, going on many walks and organization and walks and experiencing the Fells together. Ellen Wright would be one of the most important figures in helping her father to organize the preservation of the Middlesex Fells. She organized women's groups to participate in the forest festivals. She was the keeper of her father's legacy. She did that through writing, and much of the research that I was able to do on this topic was found through the gift of Ellen Wright in writing down her father's work and through public speaking. Ellen Wright spoke many times from the 1890s to the 1920s to the Medford Historical Society in talking about her father's legacy and the protection of the preservation effort of the forest festivals. Between 1883 and 1884, Eliza Wright would work on creating citizen scientists. And these citizen scientists would go into the Middlesex Fells, and they would do several things. One was establishing public domain clubs, and these would be sort of akin today to friends groups. So folks coming out and giving their time to establishing local groups to preserve talk about the fells and protect them. These citizen scientists would deploy canvassers to maintain the Middlesex fells, to keep the area clean and preserved, and also to enlist activists. And two particular names that came up in my research were Helen Porter and Patrick Doyle of Medford. These folks enlisted over 150 activists in a year period to work to help preserve the Middlesex fells. So these citizen scientists would be groups who would give their time to making sure that the preservation of this area was a reality. This is a view of Wright's Tower on Skyline Trail. Unfortunately, Eliza Wright never lived to see his work completed. He died in 1885. He had accomplished much, but his work was still unfinished. The Middlesex fells were not legally protected by the state, and it would be left to others to continue the preservation work. And one of the most important visionaries would be this man, Charles Eliot. Charles Eliot would be one of the folks who would make the Massachusetts Trustees of Reservation a reality. He had early in his life had worked with individuals and folks to preserve natural land, including Frederick Law Olmsted, designer of Central Park. And it would be Charles Eliot who worked to push through the completion of the Massachusetts Trustees of Reservation Act of 1893. And this would essentially be the law that would establish not just preservation of the Middlesex fells, but it would also bring together the Blue Hills under this state umbrella. And this was a huge accomplishment, and it was seen by many at the time in 1893 as a final act of preservation. And it established a joint committee to maintain the fells, and again set up the framework for preservation of public lands, which would continue into the 20th century. Some of the folks who also left their names on this area, we have in this picture depicted is Fanny Foster Tudor. Her mother, Virginia Tudor, was living in Paris when her last daughter, living daughter, Virginia Tudor, died in the 1890s. And in honor of Virginia Tudor, she would give what's believed to be the first gift of public land by an individual for preservation in North America. And that land still contains the name today of Virginia Wood in honor of Virginia Tudor. And this was seen as a victory for activists in the preservation of the public lands. We have an article in the Boston Herald in 1893, officially heralding another great reservation for the public. And it was seen as a victory of sorts. And the Middlesex fells and Blue Hills were preserved, what was hoped to be preservation for all time. So what is the legacy of this preservation movement? Well, and what happened afterwards between the 1890s and today? Well, modernization would lead to new problems. It would lead to new problems that would have to be dealt with. These issues would consist of issues such as access to parks, who gets to visit them, with increasing suburban population. What's the effect of encroaching suburbs on parks, and of course issues of larger environmental decay brought on by continuing pollution in surrounding areas, and today dealing with issues such as climate change. In the 1890s, we have these many small preservation movements coalesce into larger national movements. And here depicted is President Theodore Roosevelt and John Muir came together famously to help preserve natural lands, and also the creation in 1916 of the National Park Service, which is very important. Both movements, of course, very important in preserving natural lands. But unfortunately, what we run into is success building complacency. With the creation of organizations such as the National Park Service and the DCR in Massachusetts, many of these movements would turn from citizen scientists into protection by large groups, of which individuals no longer were directly a part of. So this would change. There were continuing almost immediately threats to the Middlesex Fells. One was the gypsy moth. There was actually a plan in the 1890s to burn down the Middlesex Fells, prevent the deforestation and destruction by the gypsy moth. But groups of citizens came together and refused to accept the burning down of the forest. And luckily, the Middlesex Fells were preserved. Encroaching suburbs and visitation being an important problem. Of course, you want to have folks visit parks, but in the 1890s, you have the beginning of trolleys track being laid directly into the Middlesex Fells, with increasing traffic and transportation. And by the middle of the 20th century, we have the interstate highway system, which is built through the Middlesex Fells, destroying a portion of the area in the middle of the fells, which continues to, of course, exist today, bringing traffic and congestion into the area. So as we continue up into the later 20th century, larger issues of citizens' concern with the environment would continue into organizations such as the first Earth Day, nearly almost exactly 100 years after the first Middlesex Fells. And these would take up some of the, continue with some of the same movements involving people coming together, citizens coming and concerned about the dangers of the environment. Earth Day was a global response to the challenges posed by industrialization, pollution, and climate change. Like the Fells movement, Earth Day brought a citizens movement that largely had become largely ceremonial by the early 21st century. And in these images, we can see folks gathered on the left to promote a die-in at Logan Airport in 1970, arguing against the effects of pollution from air travel. And then people coming together on the National Mall in Philadelphia at the same time, where they would listen to music and they would hear guest speakers, including Ralph Nader, and individuals simply coming together and working to clean up their environment. And many of these tactics could be found in the forest festivals of the 19th century, with folks coming together and largely in communion to try to save the environment 100 years later. And just to wrap up here, I'd like to take a look at some of the areas that the Middlesex Fells worked to preserve, and the Middlesex Fells and the forest festivals worked to preserve. And the first is the Blue Hills. And Eliza Wright said in 1871, "One only needs plant his feet on the summit in the daytime and open his eyes to see that it is one of the great parks of the future." And this is a view from the summit of the Blue Hills looking towards Boston. This is a view of the South Reservoir in the Middlesex Fells. A view of the Beaver Brook Reserve in the Middlesex Fells. All areas that wouldn't exist today without the work of these 19th century environmentalists and ecologists who worked to preserve these areas. Eliza Wright said, the lake, referring to Spot Pond, that this lake holds all the loveliness of Scotland under the name of Spot Pond. Some of these areas that exist today because folks came together to preserve these areas. The area, of course, today provides habitats for many animals. One is the eastern coyote, the gray fox at the in the top, and the bald eagle, which also finds habitat and home in the Middlesex Fells. Bird life is common in the Middlesex Fells today. We can find the belted kingfisher and the American goldfinch living in this area, calling it home. And you may ask yourself, well, how can you preserve this area? Well, preserve these natural areas today? Well, I think that the best way to preserve these areas is a combination of some of the things we've talked about today. One is to participate, to bring back that idea of citizen science and become involved in these areas, which groups such as the Friends of the Middlesex Fells depicted here offer the opportunities to do. And the other is of course government, state, federal, and local stewardship of these areas, and coming together to provide a way to preserve this natural environment. All these tactics are very useful. In summary, I'll conclude by saying 19th century activists, they overcame many challenges to the destruction of the environment and the natural world. Their hard work preserved the natural wonders in the Boston area that likely would not exist otherwise. And I would say we can learn from the work that they did, even though we face global climate and resource crisis in the 21st century. I think the most important lesson is to remind us all that we have an interest in the natural world by encouraging citizen participation along with state protection of natural lands. And remember that we all have a past and present, past and present are part of the fight to preserve the environment. Thank you so much. And that concludes my presentation. And thank you for listening.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Will. That was a really informative presentation about something that I honestly had no idea about. So thank you very much for clearly all of the hard work and research that went into that. So currently don't have any questions in the chat. Folks, feel free to drop some in. But I had two questions actually. So first I'd like to know kind of what inspired you to look into this subject. Again, something that I personally had not heard of before. What piqued your research interest?
Yeah, thanks, Sean. That's a great question. I mean, a couple things. One is I was looking for a way to sort of connect modern ecology with what folks have done in the past and try to connect those time periods together. And also in sort of doing a research and trying to find that, I came upon an article by Dan McCann. He published an article in the Boston Globe about these forest festivals and sort of the precursor to Earth Day in the 70s, the 1970s. So it kind of brought, it made me more interested to go in and kind of learn more about it and to sort of dig in and find out sort of who these people were and their contribution. So yeah, I definitely give Dan McCann credit because that first article was really, really eye-opening and informative.
Yeah, right. The research rabbit hole, right? You see the one thing that sparks something like this whole presentation. Sure. Awesome. Okay, so we do have a couple questions that came in the chat. So I'll fire them off to you here. So first question that came in was, who were the owners of the fells before it became public? Was it taken by eminent domain, and how had it really avoided development?
That's a great question. So the short answer, they were owned by private individuals. So individual houses and people who live there. A lot of the forest festival movement was also the idea was to convince people who own this property to donate it to either the state or to private preservation hands. So long story short, there was mostly private land that was given to the state eventually.
Great. So had another question about the map of deforestation over time, and it was curious if that was a source that you could share. And then also had another question in the chat asking if you'd be able to, be contacted to present this, presentation again. And I will say that I'm going to drop an email in the chat here. And if you reach out to this email address, we'd be more than happy to get back to you for those specific questions.
Yeah, I'd love to present it again. If folks are interested, that'd be great. I have to refer to my resources here, so I can probably unscreen or unshare the screen. Oh, here we go. So I have a whole list of references. So that the deforestation map actually came from archive.org.
Great.
So, yeah, so that's all. It's public source.
Yeah. Awesome. Okay, so had a question. How much of the forest is actually virgin forest? Like, do you know how much roughly like acreage there is? If you
so
don't know, that's totally fine, but wanted to give you an opportunity to speak to that.
Yeah, so it encompasses altogether about 2,500 acres. Yeah, I don't know exactly how much is specifically virgin forest. But yeah, it likely had some type of development on it, while folks were living there, but I'm not entirely sure.
Great. And then wondering if you could speak to if you are aware of any role that Indigenous peoples of Massachusetts played in the stewardship of the fells. How have they, in their relationship to the land, been considered in policy, in practice, or is that not something that has been considered? And I know that that's kind of a big open-ended question, so I want you to kind of take it in any direction you see fit.
Yeah, I would only know sort of like vaguely. I mean, Indigenous people lived obviously on the land. They hunted, fished, used the land, lived there. That's the most detail I have. I don't really know specifically, how to answer that beyond that.
Yeah, no, totally fine. Opportunity for more research, right?
Mm-hmm, for sure.
Awesome. So I think those are the questions from the chat. So I did oh, okay, sorry, missed one. How do you think current Boston policy reflects concern for the green spaces we have and the impact of loss of trees due to new construction? Again, not speaking specifically, I don't know if you're up to date as much on policy, but just anything to speak again to, kind of current policy reflecting concern for green spaces.
Yeah, I mean, I would just be speaking sort of like, just kind of vaguely, like on, what I know. I don't know anything specific. So I would think that, just speaking, not to get into public policy, because that's probably not a good format for that. I would say that
uniform anyway, right?
No, I would say encroaching suburbs are always a threat to. I don't know how a city, limits that, but encroaching suburbs and people moving into areas are always going to be a threat to natural areas. Whether obviously not intentionally necessary, but it's kind of inevitable.
Yeah. No, absolutely. All right. So final question. Could you speak a little bit to just like your general research process? Like what, obviously you have a list of sources here, but kind of how did you go about your research process and covering these sources, pulling the presentation together, kind of speaking a little bit on methodology.
Sure. So again, I kind of started with just sort of looking for a general topic, and I found this article by Dan McCann, and I found it really interesting. I sort of followed some of research rabbit holes, different sources that he had used, and then I found Ellen Wright's book, which was actually very helpful. She described pretty much everything that her father had done, including a lot of these articles or from local newspapers, of which I could go and actually find the newspapers and then sort of elaborate on that. And then I went to various sites like the Friends of the Fells, sort of researched that. There are actually a couple of really good small books that I found about this. There's just one of the sort of local guidebooks. There's one for the Middlesex Fells. I can't think of what that series of books is right now, but it was specifically on the fells. Had a lot of great images, talked about the preservation of the fells. So yeah, things like that.
Yeah, no, that's great. Awesome. Well, again, had a lot of nice comments coming in, Will, and I agree this was a very informative presentation, and really appreciate the hard work that you put into this, and all the very thorough research. And it was well organized, so great job. And with that, I will turn it back over to Karen to close us out.
And I'm back. Forever speechless. I just love these programs so much. And this is the most information I learned about something that I actively walk in all of the time. So thank you so much, Ranger Will and Ranger Sean. This was absolutely epic. If you can join us next time in 2 weeks when our talk is about, I don't know how to pronounce the name. I believe it's Jane McComb. And it's a widow witness to the revolution in Boston. I'm going to pop that in the chat real quick. If you'd like to come join us. All right, everyone. I'm going to give you a second to click on the link before we close out, and we'll see you again in 2 weeks. All righty. Thank you so much. Have a great night.